The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Academy training grounds as cadets from 12 different worlds gathered in the main briefing hall. The massive room buzzed with nervous chatter in dozens of languages. Some conversations clicked and whistled while others hummed in low frequencies that made the floor vibrate slightly. Kim Day sat in the back row, his dark eyes scanning the crowd of alien beings around him. At 24 years old, he was one of only 3 humans in the entire academy. His black hair was cut short in military style, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who had spent years working with tools and machinery back on Earth. To his left sat a tall, blue-skinned Corvin named Blex. The alien's 4 arms moved, in careful patterns as he organized his datapad and note-taking devices. Corvins were known throughout the galaxy for their logical minds and precise planning. Blex had already calculated the optimal shelter design based on the moon's weather patterns and available materials. 3 seats ahead, a crystalline being from Altair Prime caught the light and scattered rainbow patterns across the ceiling. Her name was Kess, and her entire body was made of living crystal that could reshape itself as needed. She barely paid attention to the briefing preparations, confident that her natural abilities would let her create any shelter she needed. Near the front of the room, Vorth adjusted his position on the specially designed bench made for his reptilian body. The Rexan's scales shifted from green to brown as his mood changed from confident to slightly nervous. His people were desert dwellers by nature, so this test should be easy for him. Professor Nala entered the room with the distinctive clicking sound of her 6 legs on the metal floor. The Vegan instructor stood nearly 3 meters tall, her insect-like body covered in dark green chitin that gleamed under the artificial lights. Her large compound eyes could see every student at once, and her mandibles clicked with authority. As she approached the podium, the room fell silent immediately. Even the most confident cadets knew better than to ignore Professor Nala during a briefing. She had a reputation for failing students who showed any disrespect or lack of attention. Cadets. Her voice carried clearly through the room's translation system. Today you face your final survival examination. This test will determine if you are worthy to serve in the Galactic Federation's Frontier Exploration Program. A holographic display activated above the podium, showing a barren moon orbiting a distant star. The surface looked harsh and unwelcoming, with rocky terrain broken by deep canyons and flat plains covered in loose sand and gravel. This is Kepler 442c, Professor Nala continued. The 3rd moon of a gas giant in the Outer Rim territories. Surface temperature ranges from -40 degrees Celsius during the night cycle to +60 degrees during the day. Atmospheric pressure is 60% of standard, and the air is breathable but thin. The hologram zoomed in to show massive storm systems moving across the moon's surface. Dark clouds swirled with obvious violence, and the cadets could see lightning flickering within them. Every 18 hours, massive sandstorms sweep across the surface. These storms carry particles that can strip flesh from bone and winds that can throw a full-grown Corvin across a canyon. The storms last for approximately 4 hours each cycle. Blex's 4 arms moved frantically as he took notes and made calculations. Several other cadets shifted nervously in their seats. Even the confident Kess seemed to dim slightly as she absorbed this information. Your mission is simple, Professor Nala announced. Each of you will be transported to the surface with standard survival equipment. You must construct a shelter capable of protecting you from the environmental hazards for a period of 72 hours. At the end of this time, rescue ships will retrieve you. She paused and let her compound eyes sweep across the room. Those whose shelters fail will be rescued immediately and removed from the program. Those who succeed will graduate to advanced frontier training. A new hologram appeared showing the standard survival kit. Kim Day leaned forward with interest. The kit contained basic tools, emergency rations for 5 days, water purification tablets, a small heating unit, and a multi-tool with various functions. The rules are simple. Professor Nala continued. You may use only the materials provided in your survival kit and whatever natural resources you can gather from the immediate area around your landing site. No outside assistance is permitted. No communication with other cadets is allowed during the test period. Several students raised various appendages to ask questions. The Corvin Blex wanted clarification on the definition of immediate area. A small furry being from the Tau Ceti system asked about food-gathering permissions. An aquatic student in a mobility tank questioned the water availability on the moon's surface. Professor Nala answered each question with precise detail, but Kim Dae noticed something interesting. She spoke only about building a shelter and surviving the storms. She mentioned gathering natural resources from the immediate area, but never defined exactly how immediate that area needed to be. While the other students focused on the minimum requirements for survival, Dae found his engineering mind working differently. Back on Earth, he had studied structural engineering at Seoul National University. He had worked on construction projects in some of the harshest environments on his home planet, from Arctic research stations to desert mining facilities. The professor's words echoed in his mind. Build a shelter. Use natural resources from the immediate area. No outside assistance. But she had never said the shelter had to be small or temporary or just barely adequate. As Professor Nala dismissed the class to prepare for transport, most cadets hurried away to study the moon's geology and weather patterns. They wanted to identify the best locations for simple dugouts or basic lean-to structures that would meet the minimum requirements. Kim Dae walked slowly toward the transport bay, his mind already working on a very different kind of problem. While his classmates planned to survive the test, he began to plan something much more ambitious. He thought about the coffee he would miss during the 3-day test. He thought about the cramped, uncomfortable shelters his fellow students would build. He thought about the engineering principles he had learned on Earth and how they might apply to this alien moon. By the time he reached his assigned transport ship, Kim Dae had the beginning of an idea that would surprise everyone at the Galactic Academy. He was going to build more than just a shelter. He was going to build something that would make the test almost enjoyable. The transport ship's engines hummed to life as the final preparations began. In a few hours, all the cadets would be scattered across the moon's surface, each fighting, to survive in their own way. But while the others planned to endure the test, Kim Dae planned to transform it into something entirely different. The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442c. Through the small porthole, Kim Dae watched the barren landscape grow larger below them. Rocky outcrops and sandy plains stretched endlessly in all directions. The surface looked harsh and unforgiving, exactly as Professor Nala had described. Around him, the other cadets made final preparations. Blex the Corvin reviewed his detailed construction plans one more time, his forearms moving in perfect coordination as he checked calculations on his datapad. The crystalline being Kess sat quietly, her body shifting through different colors as she mentally prepared for the challenge ahead. Vorth the Rexon stretched his scaled body and checked his equipment pack. His people were naturally suited for desert environments, and he seemed the most relaxed of all the students. He had already decided to build a simple underground burrow, just like his ancestors had used on his home world. The ship's pilot, a mechanical voice from the cockpit, announced the first drop zone. One by one, the cadets were lowered to the surface in individual landing pods. Each student would be placed several kilometers apart to ensure no collaboration during the test. Kim Dae watched through the porthole as Blex's pod descended toward a rocky area near a small cliff face. The Corvin had chosen that location because the cliff would provide natural wind protection for his planned shelter. It was a logical choice that would probably work well. Kess was dropped next, her pod heading toward an area with several large boulders. Her crystalline body could reshape itself to fit into small spaces, so she planned to create a shelter by growing crystal walls between the existing rocks. Another solid survival strategy. When Day's turn came, he had already studied the terrain, below through the porthole. Most cadets had chosen locations that offered obvious natural protection like cliffs, caves, or large rock formations. But Day had selected something different. His landing zone was in the middle of a relatively flat area with scattered rocks and debris. To most observers, it looked like one of the least promising locations on the entire moon. There was no natural windbreak, no obvious shelter materials, and no geographic advantages. The landing pod hit the ground with a solid thump, and the door hissed open. Kim Day stepped out onto the alien surface and took his first breath of the thin air. The oxygen content was lower than Earth normal, but not dangerously so. He would just need to avoid heavy exertion until his body adjusted. The gravity was also lighter than Earth standard, making him feel slightly bouncy with each step. This would actually be an advantage for construction work, as he would be able to move heavier objects than normal. Day opened his equipment pack and laid out the contents on a flat rock, standard survival kit as promised. Basic tools, food rations, water purification tablets, a small heating unit, and a multi-tool with various functions. Most cadets would use these items exactly as intended, building simple structures designed only to keep them alive for 3 days. But as Day examined each item, his engineering mind saw different possibilities. The heating unit could be modified to provide more than just warmth. The water purification system contained components that could be repurposed. Even the food packaging might prove useful as building materials. He walked slowly around his landing area, studying the terrain with the careful eye of someone who had built structures in difficult environments. The flat ground that other students had avoided actually offered advantages. There were no hills or rock formations to provide natural protection, but there were also no geographic obstacles to limit his construction options. The scattered rocks and debris that made the area look unpromising were actually a valuable resource. He could see pieces of metal from old, crashed survey probes, chunks of dense stone that would provide excellent thermal mass, and even some crystalline formations that might have useful properties, while other cadets were probably already digging foundations for simple dugouts or gathering materials for basic lean-to structures. Day began a different process entirely. He started by walking in expanding circles around his landing pod, mapping every useful resource within a 1-kilometer radius. The Academy's rules said he could use natural resources from the immediate area around his landing site. They had never defined exactly how immediate that needed to be. A careful reading of the regulations suggested that anything he could reach and carry back to his construction site was fair game. This systematic survey took him nearly 3 hours, but the investment paid off. He identified 17 different types of useful materials, including metal debris from at least 3 different crashed probes, various types of stone with different thermal properties, and even some organic compounds that might prove useful. More importantly, he found something that would become crucial to his plans. About 800 meters from his landing site, partially buried under wind-blown sand, he discovered the remains of a much larger crashed vessel. It appeared to be an old cargo transport, probably lost decades ago during the early exploration of this system. The wreckage was scattered over a wide area, but much of it was still intact. Hull plates that could serve as walls or roofing, internal support beams that were stronger than anything in his survival kit. Even some of the ship's internal systems might still be functional with the right modifications. As the first day progressed, other cadets were probably finishing their basic shelters and settling in to wait out the 72-hour test period. But Kim Day was still in the preparation phase of something much more ambitious. He spent the remaining daylight hours carefully salvaging materials from the crash site and transporting them back to his construction area. The lighter gravity made it possible to move surprisingly large pieces of metal and equipment. By sunset, he had assembled what looked like a scrapyard around his landing pod. To any observer from the orbiting Academy ship, it would appear that the human cadet was collecting far too much material for a simple survival shelter. The thermal imaging would show him working long after the other students had settled into their completed structures. Up in orbit, Lee Soo-jin monitored the test progress from the Academy observation deck. She was one of only 2 other humans at the Academy, and she watched Day's heat signature moving constantly around his construction site with growing curiosity. "What is he doing down there?" she muttered to herself as she watched the human's activities on the monitor screen. All the other cadets showed the expected pattern of quick construction, followed by rest periods inside their shelters. But the human never seemed to stop moving and working. Professor Nala clicked her mandibles with disapproval as she reviewed the day's progress reports. The human's behavior was highly unusual, but not technically against the rules. Still, she had seen many overambitious cadets fail because they tried to build something too complex for their limited time and resources. As night fell on Kepler 442c, most cadets were safely inside their completed shelters, preparing for the cold night cycle. But Kim Dae continued working by the light of his heating unit, carefully planning the foundation for something that would surprise everyone at the Academy. He had spent the first day gathering resources and materials. Tomorrow, the real construction would begin. Dawn broke over Kepler 442c with the harsh light of an alien sun. Kim Dae had barely slept 3 hours, but he felt energized and ready to begin the real work. Around his landing site, piles of salvaged materials waited in carefully organized stacks. Metal hull plates, support beams, electronic components, and various mechanical parts created an impressive collection of resources. The morning air was thin and cold, making his breath visible in small puffs. But within an hour, the temperature would climb rapidly as the moon's day cycle began. Day had planned his construction schedule around these temperature changes, knowing that the extreme heat of midday would make heavy physical work dangerous. He started with the foundation, using principles he had learned during construction projects in Earth's harshest environments. While other cadets had built simple shelters designed just to keep them alive, Day was creating something that could be expanded and improved over time. The foundation began as a rectangular outline marked with stones, but as he worked, the shape became more complex. What had looked like a single-room structure gradually revealed connection points for additional sections. Support anchor points appeared at regular intervals, designed to handle loads much greater than a simple survival shelter would require. 800 meters away, Park Min-woo emerged from his own basic shelter and stretched in the morning sunlight. He was the 3rd human at the Academy, and his landing site was close enough to occasionally see Day working in the distance. Min-woo had built exactly what the test required, a functional dugout shelter reinforced with local stones that would easily protect him for the required 72 hours. But as he looked across the flat terrain toward Day's construction site, Min-woo could hardly believe what he was seeing. The distant figure was working with pieces of equipment far too large for any normal shelter project. Even from this distance, it was clear that something unusual was happening. Min-woo activated his emergency communicator, which was allowed only for reporting dangerous situations to the Orbital Academy. Base Station, this is Cadet Park Min-woo. I need to report unusual activity at Landing Zone 7. Lee Soo-jin received the transmission in the Academy observation room. As the only human instructor monitoring the test, she was responsible for tracking the progress of all 3 human cadets. Report your observation, Cadet Park. The other human cadet appears to be constructing something much larger than a survival shelter. I can see metal structures and what looks like multiple rooms being built. Should I investigate to make sure he is not in distress? Soo-jin checked her monitoring screens. Day's heat signature showed normal vital signs and consistent work patterns. Whatever he was building, he seemed to be in complete control of the project. Negative, Cadet Park. Continue with your own test requirements. All cadets are performing within acceptable parameters. But even as she gave that response, Su Jin found herself watching Day's progress with growing fascination. The thermal imaging showed a structure taking shape that was far more complex than anything she had expected to see during a basic survival test. Professor Nala also monitored the unusual activity from her position in the Academy Command Center. Her compound eyes tracked multiple displays showing the progress of all 12 cadets. 11 were resting safely in their completed basic shelters, conserving energy for the challenges ahead. But the human in Zone 7 continued working at a pace that seemed almost frantic. Instructor Yala, Professor Nala called to her crystalline assistant, analyze the human's construction project and determine if any test regulations are being violated. Yala's crystal body shifted through different colors as she processed data from the orbital sensors. Her species was known for precise analytical thinking, and she approached problems with mathematical logic. All materials being used appear to be gathered from the immediate landing area as specified in test regulations. No outside assistance detected. No prohibited communication with other cadets observed. But what is he building? Professor Nala clicked with obvious frustration. The project appears far too complex for the time and resources available. Down on the moon's surface, Day was asking himself the same question, but from a different perspective. Each piece of salvaged hull plating fit into his design exactly as he had planned. The support beams from the crashed cargo ship aligned perfectly with the foundation anchor points he had created. What had started as careful planning was now revealing itself as something approaching engineering art. The crashed ship's components seemed almost designed to work together in this new configuration. Hull plates became walls with built-in insulation properties. Support beams created a framework strong enough to handle the moon's violent weather patterns. By midday, when the temperature soared above 50 degrees Celsius, most cadets were hiding in their shelters, waiting for cooler conditions. But Day's partially completed structure already provided enough shade and air circulation to make the work environment comfortable. He had created not just walls, but a clever ventilation system that drew cool air from ground level and exhausted hot air through carefully placed openings near the ceiling. The natural airflow kept the interior temperature nearly 20 degrees cooler than the outside air. More importantly, the structure was revealing features that went far beyond basic survival needs. What appeared to be separate rooms were taking shape, each with specific functions. A workshop area where he could modify and repair equipment, a rest chamber designed for comfortable sleeping rather than just survival, and most intriguingly, a dedicated space that seemed designed for some special purpose. The workshop area included workbenches made from flat metal plates supported by the ship's original equipment mounting brackets. Tool storage created from repurposed cargo containers. Even a small parts cleaning station using modified components from the water purification system. The rest chamber featured a raised sleeping platform that would stay dry and warm, with storage spaces built into the walls for equipment and supplies. But it was the third room that would have surprised any observer who understood its purpose. This special chamber contained carefully mounted equipment that seemed to serve no obvious survival function. Pressure vessels created from the ship's original water tanks, heating elements salvaged from the cargo ship's galley systems, a complex arrangement of tubes and valves that looked almost like a laboratory setup. As the afternoon progressed and temperatures began to drop toward more comfortable levels, Day stepped back to examine his day's work. What had been a foundation and pile of materials at dawn was now clearly recognizable as a substantial building. The walls were solid and well insulated. The roof framework was strong enough to handle much more than the moon's weather could deliver. The interior was already more comfortable than any normal survival shelter could ever be. But most important, the basic structure was complete enough to be expanded. Connection points for additional rooms waited for future development. The foundation could support much more weight than the current building required. Even the power and water systems had been designed with expansion capabilities. As the sun began to set on his second day, Kim Day realized that his project had reached a critical milestone. He had created not just a shelter that would pass the test, but the foundation for something that could become a permanent installation. Tomorrow he would add the finishing touches that would transform his fortress from impressive to truly remarkable. The coffee machine was almost ready. The third morning on Kepler 442c brought with it an unexpected discovery that would change everything the Academy thought they knew about human engineering. Kim Day stood in his completed fortress, holding a steaming cup of what appeared to be impossible coffee. The mysterious third chamber that had puzzled orbital observers for 2 days finally revealed its purpose. Using salvaged pressure vessels, heating elements from the crashed cargo ship, and modified components from his water purification system, Day had created a fully functional coffee brewing station. The brewing system was a masterpiece of improvised engineering, water heated in a pressure vessel made from the ship's original emergency tank. Ground coffee beans, carefully extracted from his emergency rations, were processed through a filter system created from his clothing and equipment bag materials. The entire setup operated on principles of pressure and temperature control that would have impressed professional engineers back on Earth. Lee Soo-jin nearly dropped her monitoring tablet when the orbital sensors detected the energy signature coming from Day's fortress. The readings showed a complex heating and pressure system operating with remarkable efficiency. "That is impossible," she whispered, as she watched the thermal display show perfect temperature control within the human structure. "What is the nature of this energy signature?" Professor Nala demanded as she studied the sensor readings. Her compound eyes clicked with agitation as she tried to understand what the human had constructed. Instructor Yala's crystalline body shifted through rapid color changes as she analyzed the data. The readings indicate a sophisticated mechanical system operating within the human's shelter. The energy output suggests heating elements, pressure regulation, and fluid processing capabilities. "Fluid processing," Professor Nala repeated slowly. What possible survival purpose could require such complex systems? The answer came when long-range visual sensors finally provided clear images of the interior. Through the fortress windows, they could see Kim Day calmly sitting at a metal table, drinking from a cup, and reviewing plans for further improvements to his structure. While 11 other cadets huddled in cramped basic shelters, conserving their energy and enduring the uncomfortable conditions, the human was not only comfortable but actively enjoying his environment. The coffee machine represented something that went far beyond survival engineering. It was a declaration that humans did not just endure harsh conditions, they imposed their own standards of civilization upon them. "This changes our understanding of human survival psychology," Lee Soo-jin reported to the Academy's research department. "Other species focus on meeting minimum requirements for survival. This human has created a living space that actually improves upon normal comfort standards." The revelation sparked intense debate among the Academy's faculty. Some argued that the human had violated the spirit of the test by creating luxury items instead of focusing on basic survival needs. Others suggested that this approach represented a fundamental difference in how humans approached hostile environments. But the real test of Day's fortress came when the moon's weather monitoring stations detected an approaching storm system much larger than anything in the forecast. The Category 3 sandstorm that was supposed to test the cadets' basic shelters had grown into something approaching Category 5 intensity. Emergency protocols activated across the Academy's monitoring systems. Several alien shelters were already showing stress signs from normal weather conditions. A storm of this magnitude could be genuinely dangerous for cadets in basic survival structures. "Prepare emergency evacuation procedures," Professor Nala ordered as she watched the massive storm system approach the test area. "All cadets will need immediate extraction if their shelters show any signs of failure." The storm hit with devastating force. Winds exceeded 100 kilometers per hour, carrying sand particles that could strip metal and stone. Temperature fluctuations swung from freezing cold to dangerous heat within minutes. Lightning struck the surface repeatedly, creating electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronic equipment. Blex the Corvan's carefully calculated shelter began showing structural stress within the first hour. His logical design had not accounted for storm systems beyond the normal parameters. Emergency signals activated automatically as his forearms worked frantically to reinforce failing support beams. Kess, the crystalline being, found her crystal, shelter beginning to crack under the pressure variations caused by the extreme winds. Her natural abilities allowed her to partially self-repair, but even she could not maintain structural integrity against forces this powerful. Vorth the Rexan's underground burrow was flooding as the storm drove water into every crack and crevice in the rocky terrain. His reptilian body could handle harsh conditions, but even he had limits when it came to drowning in an underground shelter. One by one, emergency beacons activated across the test area as basic shelters reached their failure points. The academies, rescue ships prepared for immediate deployment to save cadets whose survival structures could not handle the unexpected storm intensity. But in the middle of the chaos, one shelter showed no signs of stress at all. Kim Dae's fortress rode out the storm as if it had been specifically designed for these conditions. Internal temperature remained stable. Structural integrity never wavered. Even the coffee machine continued operating normally throughout the worst of the weather. "The human's shelter is not just surviving," reported Instructor Yala as she monitored the fortress sensors. "It appears to be functioning normally in all respects. No stress indicators, no structural concerns, no environmental problems detected." Professor Nala clicked her mandibles in amazement as she watched the storm rage around a human-built structure that seemed completely unaffected by conditions that were destroying carefully engineered alien shelters. "How is this possible? The storm forces exceed our design parameters for basic survival structures." The answer became clear when detailed scans revealed the true engineering sophistication of what Dai had built. The fortress was not just a survival shelter scaled up to larger size. It was a completely different approach to environmental engineering, designed from the beginning to handle forces far beyond minimum survival requirements. Load-bearing walls distributed stress across the entire structure rather than concentrating it at vulnerable points. The ventilation system actually used the storm winds to improve air circulation rather than fighting against them. Even the foundation design channeled forces into the ground rather than trying to resist them directly. As the storm continued to rage, Academy faculty began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. While their own species had developed survival strategies based on endurance and minimizing exposure to hostile conditions, the human had created a strategy based on transforming the hostile environment into a comfortable living space. The coffee machine, initially dismissed as frivolous human eccentricity, now represented something much more significant. It demonstrated that humans approached survival not as temporary endurance of difficult conditions, but as an opportunity to establish permanent improvements to their situation. When the storm finally passed 12 hours later, 11 alien cadets required immediate medical attention and psychological counseling. But Kim Dae emerged from his fortress refreshed, well-fed, and ready to help with rescue operations. He was still holding a cup of coffee. When the massive storm finally ended, Kim Dae stepped outside his fortress into a transformed landscape. The wind had scoured the surface clean in some areas while piling sand into new dunes in others. Debris from damaged shelters scattered across the flat terrain, and several emergency beacons flashed urgent distress signals in the distance. Without hesitation, Dae began what would become the most remarkable part of his entire test experience. While Academy rescue ships prepared for emergency extraction procedures, the human cadet took it upon himself to assist his fellow students who were in immediate danger. His first priority was Vorth the Rexan, whose underground burrow had completely flooded during the storm. The distress beacon from the reptilian cadet's location showed life signs, but indicated severe environmental stress. Day gathered emergency supplies from his fortress and set out across the difficult terrain. The journey to Vorth's position took nearly an hour of careful navigation around new sand dunes and scattered debris. When Day finally reached the site, he found the Rexan barely conscious, half drowned in the collapsed remains of what had been a carefully planned survival shelter. "Easy there," Day said as he pulled the heavy reptilian body from the flooded burrow. "Let me get you somewhere safe." Vorth's scales had shifted to a pale gray color that indicated extreme distress among his people. His breathing was labored from the thin air and contaminated water he had been forced to inhale during the flooding. Without immediate help, the Rexan would not survive until the rescue ships arrived. Day made a decision that would have surprised the Academy observers if they had been able to see it clearly. Instead of just providing emergency aid and waiting for official rescue, he began the difficult process of transporting Vorth back to his own fortress. The journey back took 3 hours because of the Rexan's weight and weakened condition. But Day's fortress had features that no rescue ship could provide: clean water, warm shelter, and most importantly, a stable environment where Vorth could recover properly. As they approached the fortress, Vorth began to revive enough to speak. "Human." "D," he wheezed in his translated voice, "why are you helping me? This will count against your test performance." "The test is about survival," Day replied as he helped the Rexan through the fortress entrance. "Helping others survive seems like an important part of that." Inside the fortress, Vorth experienced something no alien had ever encountered during a survival test. Instead of cramped emergency conditions, he found himself in a spacious, comfortable environment with clean water, regulated temperature, and even the strange luxury of fresh coffee. But Day was not finished with his rescue operations. His fortress communications equipment, cobbled together from the crashed cargo ship's emergency systems, detected additional distress signals from across the test area. Kess, the crystalline being, was trapped under debris from her collapsed crystal shelter. The storm had created pressure changes that cracked her natural crystal structure, leaving her unable to reshape herself to escape. Her distress beacon indicated that she was alive but immobilized. Blex. The Corvin had managed to survive the storm in his damaged shelter, but the structure was now completely unstable. Any movement could cause a total collapse that would crush him under several tons of rock and metal. His 4 arms were working frantically to shore up failing support beams, but it was clearly a losing battle. Park Min-woo's basic dugout had partially collapsed, leaving him trapped in a space too small to stand or lie down properly. While not immediately life-threatening, his situation was becoming more dangerous as accumulated water continued to seep into the damaged shelter. From his orbital monitoring position, Lee Soo-jin watched in amazement as thermal sensors tracked Day moving between distress locations across the test area. "He is conducting rescue operations," she reported to Professor Nala. "The human appears to be personally extracting cadets from failed shelters." "That is not part of the test protocol," Professor Nala clicked with confusion. "Each cadet is responsible only for their own survival. Rescue operations are the responsibility of Academy personnel. But our rescue ships cannot reach the surface safely until the atmospheric disturbances from the storm clear completely," Instructor Yala pointed out. "That could take several more hours. Some of the cadets may not survive that long without assistance." The debate continued in the Academy Command Center while Day continued his practical response to the emergency. His second rescue mission brought Kess back to the fortress, her crystalline body carefully supported during the difficult journey. The fortress provided her with the stable environment she needed to begin self-repair processes. "This is unprecedented," Kess whispered in her translated voice as she experienced the human-built environment. "How did you create such complex systems from basic survival materials?" "Engineering is about solving problems with available resources," Day explained as He prepared for his third rescue mission. The moon gave us lots of resources. We just had to see the possibilities. The rescue of Blex required different skills entirely. The Corvin's logical mind had created a structurally sound design, but the storm forces had exceeded all calculations. Day had to carefully dismantle the failing support system and rebuild it with stronger materials salvaged from his own surplus supplies. Your assistance violates optimal survival strategy, Blex pointed out with typical Corvin logic as they worked together to stabilize his shelter. You are expending energy and resources that should be conserved for your own survival needs. Maybe, Day agreed as he installed a new support beam, but keeping everyone alive seems more important than optimal resource management. The final rescue brought Park Min-woo to the fortress, completing what had become an impromptu refugee center in the middle of what was supposed to be an individual survival test. 5 cadets from 4 different species now shared the space that one human had built for himself. The fortress easily accommodated all of them. The modular design that had seemed like over-engineering during construction now proved its value. Additional sleeping areas could be configured quickly. The water and air systems handled the increased load without strain. Even the coffee machine produced enough for everyone, though most of the aliens found the taste strange. I do not understand human psychology, Vorth admitted as the group sat around the metal table sharing an evening meal. Your species builds far beyond your own needs, then shares the results with potential competitors. Maybe that is why humans are successful, suggested Kess, her crystal body now glowing with renewed health. Instead of just surviving challenges, you create solutions that benefit everyone. Blex calculated resource consumption rates and shelter capacity with his typical mathematical precision. The human's design efficiency actually improves with multiple occupants, he reported with surprise. The structure is more stable, the life support systems operate more efficiently, and resource consumption per individual decreases. Outside, Academy rescue ships finally began landing as atmospheric conditions cleared enough for safe operations. But when rescue teams reached the test sites, they found not scattered survivors needing emergency medical attention, but a well-organized group of healthy cadets waiting calmly in a structure that looked more like a permanent installation than a survival shelter. Captain Oh Jin-sung, commanding the primary rescue vessel, stared at his scanner readings in disbelief. "Are you certain these are the correct coordinates?" he asked his navigation officer. "I am reading a substantial structure with multiple life signs, all showing normal health indicators." "Confirmed, Captain," the officer replied. "All distress. Beacons in this sector are now inactive. The survivors appear to be in stable condition." As the rescue team approached the fortress, they could see through the windows a scene that defied all their expectations. 5 different species sat around a table, drinking from cups and engaged in animated conversation. The atmosphere was more like a social gathering than a survival emergency. The coffee machine hummed quietly in the background, still producing perfect cups for anyone who wanted them. What had started as a survival test for one had become a demonstration of something much more significant. While other species endured challenges, humans created communities that transformed challenges into opportunities for cooperation and growth. The Academy Evaluation Committee gathered in the main conference room 3 days after the rescue ships had returned from Kepler 442c. What should have been a routine review of test results had become something unprecedented in the Academy's 200-year history. Professor Nala sat at the head of the long table, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays showing detailed scans of Kim Dae's fortress. The structure still stood on the moon's surface, now designated as a permanent emergency shelter for future operations in the system. The committee must address several unusual circumstances, Professor Nala announced to the assembled faculty. Never before has a survival test candidate exceeded the mission parameters to such a degree. Never before has a test subject constructed permanent infrastructure during a temporary survival exercise. Fleet Admiral Park Yeon-soo had arrived personally from the Academy's main campus to investigate reports of the humans' remarkable achievement. As the highest-ranking Korean officer in the Galactic Federation, she wanted to understand how one of her countrymen had accomplished something that was generating discussion throughout the entire Academy system. "Show me the complete construction." "Analysis," Admiral Park requested, as she studied the technical reports spread across the conference table. Instructor Yala activated the detailed presentation, her crystalline body shifting through different colors as she processed the complex data. The human structure demonstrates engineering principles that exceed our current curriculum standards. Load distribution, thermal management, resource efficiency, and modular expandability all show innovations that our senior engineering students struggle to achieve. The holographic display showed cutaway views of the fortress, revealing the sophisticated systems that Day had created from basic survival gear and salvaged materials. The coffee machine sat prominently in one corner, no longer dismissed as human eccentricity, but recognized as a symbol of something much more significant. "The brewing system alone represents a masterpiece of improvised engineering," reported Chief Engineer Locke from the Academy's technical department. "We have analyzed the construction methods and materials, and our conclusion is that this level of innovation should not be possible with the available resources." Yet clearly it was possible, Admiral Park observed. "The question is whether this represents typical human capability or an exceptional individual case." Lee Soo-jin provided additional context from her observations during the test. "Human psychology appears fundamentally different from other Federation species. Where others focus on meeting minimum requirements, humans consistently build beyond their immediate needs. This cadet did not just survive the test, he created infrastructure that benefited everyone in the area. The rescue operation had generated its own set of unprecedented questions. Federation protocols clearly stated that survival tests were individual challenges. Cooperation between cadets was strictly prohibited, yet Day's actions had saved lives and demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond personal survival. From a technical standpoint, Professor Nala admitted with obvious reluctance, the human's performance exceeded every measurable standard. Structural integrity, environmental control, resource efficiency, and adaptability all scored at maximum possible levels. But from a procedural standpoint, interrupted Administrative Supervisor Kex, the candidate violated the individual nature of the survival test by assisting other cadets. Admiral Park studied the detailed reports of the rescue operations. 5. Cadets from 4 different species had been saved from potentially fatal situations. Without Day's intervention, the Academy would have faced multiple casualties from what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Supervisor Kex, Admiral, Park said carefully, "Are you suggesting that saving lives constitutes a test failure?" The question hung in the air as the committee members realized they were facing a fundamental challenge to their understanding of survival training. Every previous test had been evaluated based on individual performance meeting minimum standards, but the human had redefined success in terms of community benefit and maximum performance. Blex the Corvin had submitted his own report about the experience, written with typical mathematical precision. The human's approach achieved optimal results for all participants. Individual survival probability increased from 67% to 98% through cooperative resource sharing and mutual assistance. Kes, the crystalline being, provided a different perspective in her testimony. The human created not just shelter, but hope. When my own abilities failed, his engineering succeeded. When others needed help, he provided it without question. This is leadership capability that transcends survival skills. Even Vorth the Rexon, whose people were known for their competitive nature, acknowledged the value of Day's approach. The human demonstrated that true strength comes not from individual endurance, but from the ability to improve conditions for everyone. As the evaluation continued, it became clear that the committee was wrestling with more than just one student's test results. They were confronting a fundamental difference in how humans approach challenges compared to other Federation species. The implications extend beyond this individual case, observed Academy Research Director Pell. If human approaches to hostile environments consistently produce results like this, our entire survival training curriculum may need to be reconsidered. Admiral Park had reached her own conclusions about what she was seeing. The human did not just pass the survival test. He demonstrated engineering innovation, leadership capability, resource management skills, and most importantly, the judgment to prioritize community welfare over individual advancement. The final vote was unanimous, though for different reasons, than anyone had expected when the committee first convened. Kim Day had not only passed the survival test, he had achieved the highest performance rating in Academy history. But more significantly, his approach was being adopted as a new standard for survival training. The Day protocol would require future cadets to consider not just personal survival, but community support and infrastructure development as part of their evaluation criteria. The coffee machine became an official part of the Academy's permanent collection, displayed in the main lobby with a plaque reading, "Engineering Excellence Through Innovation and Community Service." 6 months later, Kim Day returned to Kepler 442C as the Academy's newest survival training instructor. His fortress had been expanded into Emergency Station Day 1, serving as a permanent rescue facility for the entire system. The coffee machine still worked perfectly, now serving cups to travelers, researchers, and cadets from dozens of different species throughout the galaxy. Each cup came with the same lesson that had transformed the Academy's understanding of what survival truly meant. The goal is not just to survive the test, Instructor Day told his first class of mixed species cadets. The goal is to build something. That makes the next person's test a little bit easier. As his students began their own survival exercises, several alien cadets could be seen sketching plans for structures that went far beyond basic shelter requirements. The human approach was spreading throughout the Federation, one engineering, innovation at a time. The fortress still stands on Kepler 442C, its lights visible from orbit as a beacon of human ingenuity and cooperation. Travelers throughout the sector know they can find not just emergency shelter there, but a perfect cup of coffee and a demonstration of what becomes possible when survival is redefined as an opportunity to build something better. The Academy's motto had quietly changed to reflect this new understanding. Where once it read, "Survive and endure," it now proclaimed, "Build and share." And in the Fortress Workshop, new cadets continue to discover that the most important survival tool is not any piece of equipment, but the human ability to see possibilities where others see only problems.